thanks, Lin Sim, for the opening speech. What I'd like to pose to the esteemed panel are three sets of questions. We will start with getting the panelists to give their views on Lin Sim's speech, what are their thoughts, what's their perspectives, and we will start with ladies first, Prue, Rachel, then we go on to Chin Yi, and then we end up with Prof. And I also will ask Prof a side question on the chicken and egg question, the cause and effect question as to which comes first, performance or diversity. Since Lin Sim brought it up, we will pose a question to Prof as a side question. The second question that I'd like to pose to the panelists will be, where do we stop? A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and we've taken the first step with gender diversity. But where do we stop in terms of diversity? So I'd like to hear the panel's views. And finally, how do we measure performance when it comes to diversity? In Singapore, there's a safety campaign called low crime doesn't mean no crime. So performance is measured by the fact that there's some crime and the police have to do their work. But when it comes to performance, there's nothing means good performance. Is diversity a maintenance mode, or you need diversity to generate the performance? So comments from the speech or on the speech, where do we draw the line on diversity and how do we measure performance? And with that, let's go over to Prue, your views on Lin Sim's speech.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to join this esteemed panel. I thought it was an excellent speech, and I absolutely agree with everything that was said. So thank you very much, Lin Sim. Excellent work. I've been watching the diversity debate for about 15 years now, originally from an Australian perspective, and then when I had my 7 years living in Asia from an Asian perspective when I was with BlackRock. And there's no doubt, and Lin Sim talked about research, that diverse teams drive better decision making, and from an investor perspective, that's what our investors are really looking for. A good management team to drive better decision making. Some other research also, again, is linking that gender diversity to performance, but also looking at down the level of the board to the leadership team, and diversity in that senior leadership team is just as important to return as it is at the board level. And when we look at countries like Singapore and Hong Kong and compare them to, say, Australia, the UK and the US, the diversity statistics are still behind. And one of the reasons for that is, and I know Lin talked about the guidelines of some of the world's largest asset managers, is that the institutional voice isn't as strong in Singapore as it is in Australia. The first paper I did back in 2011, there was about 13% women on boards in Australian companies. As at the end of last year for the ASX 200, the main index, it was up to 34%. So the original target was 30%, so they have far exceeded that. And now there's discussion about revising that target to 40%. And in fact, there's a movement with the pension fund groups in Australia talking about a 40-40-20, which is 40% women and 80% other categories such as LGBTQI. So the debate has really moved right along. But most Australian companies are widely held, and with policies of the institutional investors saying that they will vote against the re-election of the chair of the nomination committee, where diversity on the board hasn't been addressed, is a really big stick. Where in Singapore and Hong Kong, where you have block shareholders, family and state, that voice isn't as strong. And I think that's one of the reasons why countries like Singapore and Hong Kong haven't progressed as quickly as countries like Australia. And I engage with a lot of companies now I'm back in Australia, talk to chairmen about, what's changed with the board, with gender diversity. And I haven't had one chairman say to me, oh, actually, there's no change, it's not as good. They talk about the change in the nature of the discussion around the board table. So, better discussion, different views coming in, and again, driving that better decision making. From an investor point of view, that's what it's about.
Thank you, Prue, for the comment. Any feedback from yourself, Lindsay, with Prue's comments?
No, please carry on.
Thank you. Now let's bounce over to Rachel. Rachel, your thoughts on Lindsay's speech?
Thank you, Wan Chen, and thank you, SIAS, for having me. I must first declare that I am a member of the Council for Board Diversity. So, you know, I am already a proponent and supporter of diversity. But, and I think I agree with most of what's been said. I think if a board, you know, consists of people who are very similar background, similar age, similar network, it's convenient, right? It's easy for us to just have a easy discussion and come to a decision. I guess I want to share that, you know, today we are in a really volatile world where we're faced with many challenges, whether it's a lack of trust in political system, the climate change, aging population, and so on, and technology and the need to transform and digitalization. I remember when I started work some decades ago, my senior partner said, oh, you know, we go through 10 good years and one bad year, right? So every 10 good years, you get one bad year. And then, you know, as I work through the last 10, 20 years, I say, hey, you know, it often feels like, you know, 3 bad years, 1 or 2 good years potentially, and then we, you know, it's bad years. So what this means is that we need all directors that are able to give different perspectives and bring different skills to the table to really help the board as a whole and the CEO to try and navigate and forecast, you know, what are potential events or black swan events that may be coming up. If you have a few buddies who are of similar background and similar skill set, it's much harder for the group to I really brainstorm what could be coming up. So in some of the boards that I sat on, you know, we have directors that insist that we sit around and think very hard about what could be the black swan event that's coming up next. So I think my view is having a mixture of directors of different background, and gender, of course, is one key factor, will definitely add to that conversation and that discussion and the depth of the discussion. Back to you, Wan Chen.
Thanks, Rachel. Chin, over to you. What are your thoughts on Lin Sim's opening speech?
Thanks, Wan Chen, and thanks, Lian Sim, for your speech, delivered with your customary incisiveness of views. Really, there's nothing to disagree with, and as you know, we have already put in place our listing rules to require disclosure of a board diversity policy by our companies to take into account different factors such as gender, skills, and other relevant diversity factors to the company. The boards also have to disclose targets and their progress on an annual basis. So one thing I will add is that perhaps if you go back to the foundation of why diversity is important, it's really about avoiding groupthink and also to ensure a very robust examination of issues that come before the board. And what we strongly feel is that without a strong commitment to incorporating diverse skill sets and mindsets, and by default, that would also mean a less ability of the board or less susceptibility of the board to groupthink. You get a much more robust decision-making process. On that note, I would state that one important thing about avoiding groupthink is a super level of independence in both the directors involved in the discussions as well as the composition of the board. And I think most of you will be aware that we have recently announced that we intend to consult on a hard cap on the tenure of independent directors before they will be considered non-independent. And this is another important element for us in ensuring that the board remains independent and also to drive board renewal and by default assist the process of getting more diverse directors on the board.
Right, thanks, Chin. I'll come back to you on disclosure. The recent disclosure requirements by SGX on diversity, you've gone beyond gender now. So the question I'd like to pose to you after I come back from Prof is where do we draw the line? How much disclosure does SGX expect in terms of all aspects of diversity to how often you cut your hair, which places you go for your holidays. So I'll come back to you in a while, let you think about that, Chin. But let me go over to Prof. Low. So Prof, your thoughts on Lian Sim's speech, and just as important, the chicken and egg question, which comes first, diversity or performance?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Low, moderator. I know you're going to ask the chicken question, but anyway, it's good to be here this afternoon with our learner and very illustrious panelists and also speaker. Actually, I come from the university to begin with. I don't know why I'm here. The word university in itself suggests that we are all concentrated or in one direction. Maybe we should be called a multiversity. At least that's closer to diversity. But anyway, since I come from the academia, and of course, in Lian Sim's speech, I think in her opening few paragraphs, she already posed me a challenge, very, very strong challenge. In fact, which is something that relates to the stream of work that I do at the university on the impact or the performance implications of diversity, including gender and other dimensions. And over the years, our stream points to a very strong relationship, but of course, not all quite positive, but most of the key determinants points to enhanced performance, at least at the listed company in Singapore Exchange. And I must say, Lian Sim actually hit it right in the nail, which is there any causality? And of course, I think that this is a very, very valid, very erudite questions. And I must first of all say that in many of the research we do, including by practitioners, consulting companies, they also have in this game. We are obviously and clearly not knowledge limited, not method limited, but actually data limited. Let me explain very shortly. If you really want to test for causality, a simple way, in simple terms, is of course the experimental method. You do a control experiment, you vary certain variable, and of course the experimental method is not something we can do in the company. Of course, if Chinny can volunteer some issuers for me to study, I will gladly grab them and go down to the boardroom and do a control experiment to all dimensions of diversity and do a cause and effect observational study. So that's rule out experimental method. Then the other method is, which is what we are doing, is the influential method or statistical method. And I think this is where the causality needs to be actually looked at. There are certain statistical techniques can be done, but we are hampered by other variables that might lead to the performance, not just the determinant of the diversity itself. It may not be the woman effect. In other words, there may be other effects that seems to correlate with the womanness of or even the age or education or whatever. So the first set is other variables, other impacting noises. And the other thing is, of course, across time. So other variables, the other dimension across time, we must see that there's in our words, there's a temporal relational contiguity between the cause and the effect. So all these are very, very difficult, but to put it in very simple way, even if right now we have achieved a lot of relational implications on performance, I think it is good because it is a very, very good starting point towards the end point, which is causality. If there's no starting point, there's no end point. And all the results now, I would admit, are not sufficient condition, but at the very least, these are necessary conditions for us to bring the conversation forward so that eventually this large sample information can inform our wisdom on company, corporate leaderships, corporate behavior, one company at a time. And of course, this is something very good. And then there's another side question, if I have the time, on the chicken and egg problem in university academic term. This is the usual problem. If I please allow me to use a technical word, is the usual word called endogeneity. In other words, there's a correlation between the treatment and the outcome, but never mind, put aside all these technical words. Yes and no, it might be happen that the best performing company will have the resources to invest in diversity.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think that's the crux of the problem. So all this can be solved using our statistics techniques, and we have control for that in many things. But the main thing in simple terms is to add in other explanatory variables to the variable that you want to examine in question. So collectively, we can rule out the reverse impacts. And I think our team has done that as well in very simple terms, that to account for the problem of, I say again, endogeneity. Okay, thank you. The 2C, causality, chicken and egg, two big problems. Yeah.
Thanks, Prof. I'd rather eat the chicken first. So come back to Chin Yi. We've talked about gender diversity, and we have in a way isolated that, and we have believed that is strongly correlated to performance. And SGX added to the mix of age and experience in terms of disclosure. So, Prof, do you think, Chin Yi, do you think this will muddy the water because we cannot isolate which is the item that actually affects performance? Is it age, experience, or gender, or you add in more things out of the mix? Where do we draw the line? So maybe Chin Yi, how much more disclosure does SGX want to push the envelope? And we'll come back to you, Prue.
Thanks for that, Anchen. So maybe I can start off with, if you forgive me, slightly on a more academic basis, I've been contaminated by Prof. Low. So there is the concept of diversity, and the evidence and the logic all points in one direction, that a more diverse board should, in theory, be able to deliver more robust and good decisions. It's both a process safeguard, and it's also a means of improving the outcome. Then, of course, there's execution, because diversity is just a broad concept. And so far, studies have concentrated on the lowest hanging fruits. So you have gender, you have skills, you have experience. Other studies have looked at other factors in addition: ethnicity, social background, cultural background, and so on. So I think for us, the first thing to understand is that for us, it's a journey towards a outcome where boards are diverse sufficiently to ensure that the best outcomes come out for their companies. And that will differ depending on every industry, which is why our rules on disclosure do not mandate that you must have certain types of diversity or certain factors which always must be on the board. We do require that the diversity policy considers the clear factors which are established to have a potential effect on performance.
And what would these clear factors be, Chin Yi?
So the clear ones, which I think has a general agreement, gender, skills, and experience have all been shown in multiple studies to have had a beneficial effect in the companies which are observed to have these factors of diversity. We do not rule out that there are other factors which are possible. So companies are meant to consider whether other relevant factors should be included in their policy. At this point, I will say that, as I said, it's a concept. But what's more important to us is to carry out this concept, you're going to have the culture and the commitment and the belief that this actually makes sense. So the studies only address the head, its data, its logic. How do we get the heart to follow? And so for us, the disclosure is a means of making sure that the ecosystem thinks in that same way, making sure that company directors follow a discipline and structure method of setting out their goals and targets and making them publicly accountable for their plans and timelines. It also empowers the shareholders to have a better insight into how their board thinks, to get more reassurance that their board is committed to getting a more robust structure and decision-making process. And at the end of the day, habit breeds culture. And as more people think this way, the understanding of what is good diversity or excessive diversity would start to converge a little bit more. And that actually will answer your question, Anjan, because it's not, I think, so much about where do we draw the line on what are relevant factors or not. Yes, but the line is when we are diverse enough, then it's about finding which factors maybe give you more delta, more outperformance. And that is where academics like Professor Low and all the panelists here would play a huge part in helping us answer. But before that, there must be a common vocabulary and a common culture. Yes, and we need to build that.
Okay, that's great stuff, Jinyi. Prue, you wanted to jump in on your perspective on research?
Yeah, the comment that I wanted to make is that, yes, you can look at board composition, you know, gender balance, and try and relate that to performance, but I think we've got to take a step backwards, and this is quite hard to measure. I think I'm not an academic, so for Flo, please feel free to challenge what I'm saying. But from my engagement work, the most important process is the nomination process, because that determines the outcome of what's on the board. And it's very, and I did a research paper on Hong Kong companies in 2013, and the level of disclosure around the nomination process was just so perfunctory. You could not do it. Was cut and paste for all companies. It didn't tell you what in terms of did they prepare a skill matrix, and I think skills matrix are very important. They've been part of the Australian Corporate Governance Code since about 2015. And they have matured over the time. So it's been about 7 or 8 years since companies have had to produce, as part of their corporate governance statement, a skills and experience matrix. And I think that's the starting point for the nomination committee. And again, that's not really focused on gender. And I think when you look at the graduation levels from universities over the last 20 years, they've been 50-50 men and women in most schools, not all schools. If you take engineering, I know it's a lot lower. Engineering graduates being women, but if you take disciplines like economics, commerce and law, in Australia it's about 64% women, and that's been that way for a long time. So if a board is really undertaking a comprehensive nomination process focused on the skills and experience, casting a wide net without even considering gender, the outcome will be probably, I'm guessing, say about 30%. Between 30% and 40% women on the board. And that's not even ticking a box where we want to have 30% women on the board. If the nomination process is done properly, the outcome will be for this board, not just in terms of gender, but in terms of skills. And this is very, very challenging for an outsider such as an investor to look at company disclosures and really understand how robust that process is. And so I would encourage companies to really consider being more transparent around that process, because that's what determines the outcome on the board.
Sorry, I'm myself. Thanks, Prue. Rachel, and come in on the chicken and egg question.
Maybe not quite chicken and egg, but I wanted to add on the back of Chinese and Prue's point. Totally agree that the Nomcom nomination committee plays a big role. I must confess that when I was in a nomination committee, I felt sometimes I'm not adequately prepared really to assess who's a good candidate, who should be the next candidate if someone retires. So it does need some forward planning, you know, because personally I feel it's not just a single director's skills or contribution, but at some point of time, it's the combination of the characters within the board that makes sense. And I want to comment a bit on what Chini said, which is the rules are there and it's to guide the board's action, and hopefully it changes, or rather enhances that culture as well, and eventually comes from the heart. I just want to add another angle, which is when you have diversity, you also need a very experienced chairperson. Because with diversity comes a bit of differing views and opinions and different characters and different background. So I really hope that with more disclosure, with more company jumping on board, we do also need to ensure that the chairperson of the board is adequately equipped to manage this diversity, to make it work. Because I've seen boards where the lack of management can also lead to, I guess, a non-beneficial outcome. So yeah, I wanted to contribute that we should also maybe train up or maybe enhance the ability of the board chair to manage that diversity. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. Let's jump back to Jinyi again. There's a couple of questions on disclosure. There's a question on the 9-year rule. If you hard code that, would that help push along diversity to the next level? And there's a question from Richard, that's from Raj Bucks. Thanks, Raj, sorry. And another question from Richard Dyson on NASDAQ's disclosure requirements on the matrix. So maybe Jinyi, over to you, a couple of disclosure questions, then we jump back to Prof. Loh. I think he wanted to come in on some comments, and then we'll go back to Len Sim. So Jinyi.
Sure. Thanks, Chen. First question on the 9-year rule and the connection to how you can contribute to diversity. So irrespective of diversity itself, the independence of thought and the ability to contribute independently on the board is already very crucial. So the need to have a proper level of independence in board composition is in and of itself necessary for good corporate governance and performance. Now, how it adds diversity is, it may not be an obvious, or maybe it's a very obvious diversity factor. You know, if you're independent of the rest of the board or the chairman, you clearly are a bit more diverse. But that's not the relationship I think I would draw. What I would say is that by putting in place hard caps on how long independent directors can serve as independent directors, you help to drive renewal as well. And by driving the renewal process and in tandem with our requirement on boards to consider diversity explicitly in their search for new candidates, this I consider it more as a tailwind for boards in their diversity journey.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, Jinyi. It's a tailwind, it pushes things along.
Yes. Secondly, on the disclosure, can I trouble you to repeat the question? I didn't scribble it down fast enough.
No problem. There's a question from Richard Dyson that NASDAQ has a diversity matrix for disclosure. Will SGX be adopting something similar?
Thanks for that. We do have, it's somewhat similar to what we already require right now for our listing rule requiring the disclosure of a board diversity policy, because one of the things we do require as well in that rule is an annual disclosure of a description of how the combination of skills, talents, experience, and diversity of the whole board will serve the needs of the company. So I think we felt, and we did consult on it, we felt that having a pure hard-coded matrix of skills would be overly prescriptive, because what you actually want the directors and the board to be flexible in their thinking on what suits the needs of the business, and that is dynamic, that changes.
So
right? If we hard-code it,
must be diverse
yes.
in itself.
Yes, exactly. You need to be diverse in consideration of diversity. And so what we thought was perhaps right now better is pure disclosure of how the directors think of the composition of the board, the skills, what's needed, what's next. And that shapes the thinking of themselves, and they can move on that journey together with the shareholders.
Thanks, Jinyi. Over to you, Prof. There's a question from Randy Sim, Mr. Randy Sim, on the research on the impact of diversity. And after that, let's go over to Rachel and Len Sim. Maybe both of you can share with us the efforts of the Center for Board Diversity. Currently, its focus has been on gender. Where would be the next pivot to? Which factor of diversity would you think the CBD will pivot to? So a question for Rachel and Len Sim, but over to Prof. Loh first.
Yes. Let me try to answer the question and so contextualize to the ongoing discussion, especially when Prue just now mentioned also my name in her articulation. I think the question now, and I think many of you might probably agree, I think for many companies, the question right now is not so much whether we need to have diversity. Yep. I think that's already given. I think the emphasis now we have to move is how do we get diversity? And I think right now, we are still in my way, in the way I look at it, maybe somewhat groping around. But for example, in management or directors event that I go to, this is where I see diversity hunting at its height during cocktail, when members, especially if you are female or maybe let's say minority group, you tend to get attention because probably the nominating committees are on the prowl. People like me, pale and male, they probably will ignore me. You go to directors conference, somehow the gents toilet, you have a long queue. So anyway, so I think we have to really, beyond the chicken and egg, actually now go to the nuts and bolts of achieving diversity, not just go on saying whether we should do it. I think it's already something that's established in terms of knowledge, in terms of evidence, in terms of normative, I would say, recommendation going forward. So I think we probably need, and I think maybe SIAS can help out, to design a certain methodology that's perhaps structured, that's perhaps granular, exhaustive. How do companies actually go about doing it in a more systematic way? I know there are some associations that have board posting, they have a matchmaking process. I think we should have more of that. Many companies actually need a lot of help, but they are quite shy sometimes to ask for help. So we can have a proper, beyond advocacy, engagement process. And I think even SGS and professional firms like Brunswick, of course, namesake and Ing and company, you are all in the space that can move the needle towards the nuts and bolts beyond the eggs and chicken. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Prof. Over to Rachel and also Lian Sim. The Center for Board Diversity started with gender as its main platform. If I can ask you, where would be your next bet? Which aspect of diversity are you going to push for the next lap?
Maybe I go first and then Lindsay, who's the expert, can comment. We are called the Council for Board Diversity, and short the CBD. It is a council of about 21 members, co-chaired by SGX CEO Boon Chai and Mildred Tan. Currently, our focus is still primarily on gender. That is still our main mission, given that Singapore is a country where with equal education and work opportunities for male and female. It's a little bit embarrassing, to say the least, that our female directors numbers are hovering around 20-ish. We've changed the strategy a little bit at the country level with the formation of CBD. Previously, boards complained that they couldn't find the female candidates. So what we like to do now is for some of the female candidates who are unable to sit on profit boards or listed companies because of their vocation, their lack of approval from their companies, we are able to place them on, say, statutory boards or government boards or charity boards if it's in line with their interest. Through that, we hope that they get exposure to fellow directors, male and female, who are themselves on listed boards, and through recommendation referral, that these female candidates move on to the listed boards. So currently, back to your question, we're mainly focusing on gender as the main focus right now, because we can't even solve this at the moment, short of imposing a quota, which we don't have well, nobody's really pushing for quota at this point. Yeah, Nancy?
But if you were to make a bet, Rachel, if you were to make a small bet, what diversity factor would that be? Would that be age or experience?
I think experience, is granted. A lot of boards these days, we prepare skills matrix, right, to see what skills the boards have. So that I hope is a given, but if not, I think experience. In Singapore, we're also very conscious that in some contexts we need ethnic diversity, and increasingly age as well. I think if you talk to some of the powers to be or the agencies, they are also quite focused on age diversity. Yeah. Linsim?
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Linsim? You're on mute.
I can
Linsim,
confirm what Rachel said, indeed, and that that gender diversity is still not, the global percentages are in the 30s, and we're just 20 plus, and so we need to move it up. But I think it's more than that. It's not just which particular aspect, because the diversity in itself is not the main target. The main target is the company's performance and what is good for the company. Hence, Redco, SGX Redco got it right when they linked the diversity to the needs of the company and of the business and strategy. In a way, you want the board members of the nominating committee to think about what they need to drive that company further forward in the leadership. If things are changing rapidly, one person cannot keep their eye on everything or every industry or every sector. Then a group can do it much better. Also, that group person may be involved in something that gives him an idea of what's to come, and that may be relevant for the industry, but not there yet. So it's in these ways that in a sense, you get an early idea. And isn't that what boards do? They need to scan the horizon. They need to look into the future. They need to analyze what's happening, what's likely, when, the pace, and so on, to deal with these dynamic situations as well. So in a case of uncertainties, then you want the board to think of the various types of skills, experience, independent thinking that they need, and then compose their board. And having more transparency then allows the stakeholders and the shareholders to have some insight into how the board thinks and how the company is moving, and then to question and to have their say and exercise their rights. I think I wouldn't say I wouldn't focus on just one or the other aspect. That is less important than what diversities are required by the company in the situation and looking forward, so that we don't, as shareholders, then go to the AGM and say, why didn't you do this or that? But we too should be looking forward and thinking, is this forward-looking action of the leaders what I would expect?
Yep. I think Lian put it so much better than I did. But like the standard argument where if you're, your customers are half of them are female, but you have an all-male board, how is the board really going to understand what the trends of the consumers or their customers are? Or if they are targeting the young as their customers, and if a board with all senior members, how are you going to understand what the young people are thinking? So I think, that all this contribute to the argument for diversity. Sorry, Lian.
No, not at all. And then I wanted to put the other point of view, since with SIAS, we know we have also retail shareholders in the audience and who are with us. I wanted to say that in some ways, all these disclosure, we've got more information from the company, but then it's also incumbent on us as individual shareholders to study a bit harder, know a bit more, so that we can use the information and comment on it. And I think that it would be a loss if we didn't do that. So the individual effort and the effort of groups like SIAS to help individual shareholders to make that comment, so that even though as a whole the voting may not be able to make such an impact as demonstrated to us earlier, but the comments are also important, and that gets to the individual board members and the chairman.
There's a question again on hard coding on the tenure of directors. Chin-Yi, would you want to take that?
Sure.
Then we start the conversation on performance. How do we measure performance? So Chin-Yi, over to you.
Yeah, I'm very glad for the question, because it gives me a chance to clarify what exactly this hard coding means. And what we're basically saying is that we think there perhaps ought to be a hard cap on how long an independent director can serve as an independent director. Now, that's not the same thing as saying that's how long a director can serve as a director on the board, because an independent director after the 9 years, let's say that is the hard cap, can still continue to stay on the board, but he or she would be staying on the board as a non-independent director. And as you know, our rules right now require that 1/3 of our board must be comprised of independent directors.
All right, thanks, Jimmy, for that remark. Now let's move on to the third part of the question. So we talked about how long is a piece of string, like diversity. Where do we stop on that? We talk about Len Sim's opening speech. Now let's go to performance. How do we measure performance? Or for the matter of fact, what is performance when it comes to diversity? Does it mean more profits, or does it mean a better culture? Does it mean, what does it really mean? Maybe Prof, over to you. How do you measure performance linked to diversity?
Wow, thank you, moderator. This sounds like a PhD level question, but to put it in very straightforward way, there are two streams of thought in terms of performance. First of all, is of course to look at it objectively. So most researchers or even most consultants or even advocates will use financial performance as the proxy.
Yeah.
Usually two categories. One is accounting based, which is looking at all the book numbers. The other one is market based. Usually we look at stock return, and also a third type, which is hybrid, both accounting and market combined together. So this part is the easy part, and in fact I must confess, in the stream of research we do, we tend to go towards the objective, because this is what, to be very fair and quite direct, this is what a lot of shareholders are looking for. Okay, so that's one stream. The other stream is a bit more difficult and challenging. It's a subjective way of looking at performance, and beyond financial performance, we are looking at one key construct, which is organizational effectiveness. So in other words, like what you say, the cultural dimension, the leadership dimension, some of the parameters in organization that cannot be imputed in terms of quantitative numbers. And usually we have to do a kind of a survey with a artificial scaling, maybe from 1 to 5, 1 to 7. How do they rate yourself? How for example, a question we like to ask, do you think your pay is enough? Everybody will put overwhelming no. I mean, so 7 no. I mean, so there's a lot of self-reported by bias in terms of this. So which is why we want to go back to the objective measure. I'll stop here. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, Prof, that you use the word proxy for the financial measures. You use the accounting and the market numbers as a proxy. So by that, I would infer that there is a proxy to a real measure. And would a real measure be non-financial?
Yes, that definitely collectively you will allow. If you don't have a good culture, you don't have a good leadership team, if you don't have good structures, don't have good processes, you can never make a profit. So in other words, that representation is somewhat a sufficient statistic of reality. That's the assumption made by most accountants. I think this is a very basis of accounting profession. I mean, yeah.
So would that be linked to sustainability? So would ESG? I know I'm bringing in another mix to the front. Would sustainability be a key factor to measure in terms of the quality of diversity of the organization?
Oh, definitely. Sustainability will bring in one more dimension, which is a longitudinal dimension, the time horizon. In sustainability, we get long term, and usually accounting numbers are short term in nature. And hopefully, and I think Chini will probably agree, stock market should be long term in nature. I mean, they should know everything in an efficient market. So they should be able to discount all the information perfectly and accurately from time infinite term to the present. So yeah.
Thanks, Prof. Welcome back, Prue. Hope your internet is better. We were just talking about how do you measure performance, and Prof kicked off the discussion by looking at two dimensions to it, the financial dimension and the non-financial dimension, to measure the outcome of diversity. So diversity is a means to an end, and the outcome is really both financial performance and non-financial performance. And his view, if I can characterize it properly, is that the non-financial performance drives the long-term financial performance of the organization. So maybe, Prue, I can hear from you, what outcome do we want from diversity?
Definitely a driver of long-term sustainable returns. And I think, you know, we've now got an opportunity with the establishment of the International Sustainability Standards Board, which is going to create a baseline of ESG reporting. And one of the requirements, and it probably take a couple of years to come into effect, is that the sustainability disclosures under the ISSB standards will be required to be disclosed at the same time as the financial information that shareholders get at the moment. So I think there's going to be a real link between, obviously, you know, financial returns have been a basis of measure for a very long time, but also looking at the I don't really like the term non-financial measures, but I haven't got a better term, because if those issues aren't managed well, the outcomes are financial, or if they are managed well, they can be positive from a financial perspective. But for many years, active managers in the way they assess companies and trying to assess the quality of management are looking at some of those non-financial measures. And there's been a lot of work done around occupational health and safety, and those companies that manage those occupational health and safety issues well tend to outperform companies that don't. So I think this is a very big opportunity that we'll get some more consistent and comparable data that is non-financial to be able to measure overall performance and hopefully link that to longer term financial returns.
Thanks, Prue. Going on your touching on the ISSB, or the International Sustainability Standards Board, come out with S1 and S2 standards on climate change and broad-based sustainability impacted financial reporting. Do you think the ISSB will come up with future standards on culture, on resilience?
Culture is very hard to measure. There's an argument that you shouldn't be measuring culture, you should be measuring conduct. Conduct is something you can measure, and poor conduct. And if you take an example of Wells Fargo, if they were measuring poor conduct at the time, maybe they would have identified a culture issue where 5,000 people didn't know the difference between right and wrong, and established companies in accounts in false names. But I think they will be following the current SASB standards, which are very sector-based. And although I was on the board of the Value Reporting Foundation, so I was quite close to the development of the ISSB, biodiversity is definitely a topic that is under discussion for work by the ISSB. But I think taking the current SASB standards, internationalizing them, because they are very US focused, and having a proper consultation process. Again, the purpose of the ISSB is to provide information for the providers of capital. It's not a multi-stakeholder organisation or trying to create a report to cover stakeholders apart from the providers of capital, and a global baseline for that reporting in a consistent and comparable way. And I just see this as a very big opportunity for investors.
Thanks, Prue. Let's go over to Len Sim, then to Chin Yi, then we'll come back to Rachel. We talked about the sustainability and performance and link to diversity. So the dots are starting to connect. So maybe Len Sim, your favorite topic, TCFD, climate change, and Chin Yi, now that the exchange has required TCFD reporting or climate change reporting on the Comply Explain at least until 2024, would diversity improve performance in terms of climate change disclosure?
Oh, you remember the chicken and egg. So does climate change abilities or information or awareness, or abilities, if you like, just generally, which comes first? Does it make it more diverse? Or does it come the other way around? So in other words, I think that if you were a company looking forward and you didn't have anyone on your board who understood climate change in your industry, then you probably have a gap there. You'd want to add someone who did. And wouldn't that increase your diversity as well from the present to the to the new state? So I think in the end, and companies want to have a better present and future performance, a sustainable a future as well. So they're looking at what they have to know and what they have to contend with and react to, or they're looking at the opportunities and the risks. And the better they can manage both, the more successful they will be. And if this is in climate, then climate it is that they look for. If it is social, then social it will be. So if you're looking at something like modern slavery, if you're in, say, the fishing industry, or the very typical ones, the fishing industry, construction industry, that's something you would be looking at, and that might not be so relevant to someone who is in like SGX, for example. So we're an exchange services industry, financial industry. Those issues are part of the business, but maybe not directly part of the way we do our business currently. So I think so each company, it's a decision they have to make, and they have to look at it so that in the end, when you have your good performance, let's say better use of funds, or better use of resources, a saving, and that leads to a better performance. So did the saving come because you wanted to do a sustainable thing, or did it come because you were just looking at P&L? Either way, you got the saving. So I think that it's a sustainability, climate change offer you a different lens, as it were, onto the business. But in the end, what you decide and how you deal with it will have that same financial effect that you will get in the future.
Thanks for that, well articulated, and it is certainly, I think.
Hauntingly.
No, I think sustainability, as I think articulated by Prof. Loh and yourself on climate change, whether it's a big chicken or big egg, but it's certainly in the room already, and it does drive the conversation between performance and diversity. So maybe over to you, Chin. Sustainability, the exchange is big on that in this disclosure. So how is it linked? Sustainability, performance, and diversity. Where's the nexus that brings these two together?
So when we talk about pure financial performance, I believe most of the other panelists have already dealt with it to some extent. Where I would try and give an additional point of view is, from our perspective, this need for information on how companies are dealing with challenges that may not be financial at first glance, climate change, social factors, how to make sure they're more diverse and more resilient. These are all demands that are increasingly being made of the company in the public market from the investors, notably from many big institutional investors. Our view is that this information is become a necessary part of the ecosystem, and a company must meet the needs of its stakeholders, which include your investors. And hence, from my view, the disclosure requirements seek to build a platform and assist the companies in meeting the needs or the demands that they're going to be facing in the future, and most notably from the market, if nowhere else. And the second thing I perhaps would just add here is we've just introduced these requirements, and we will be reviewing the company's disclosure next year, where every company would have had to disclose their sustainability requirements and their diversity policy in their annual reports with great interest.
Okay, thanks, Chin. Over to you, Rachel, before we go over to Prue to answer a question from Raj Bucks on how do Singapore companies compare to Australian companies. So Rachel, how do we define performance? We've gone from non-financial to financial, to sustainability, to climate change, to how is it linked to diversity? So how do you measure performance as a result of diversity?
Well, I think as we mentioned earlier, diversity allows us to add to the skills mix, the capability of the board, and also the depth of the discussion. And with that, it better, I guess, equip the board to deal with the new world or the current world. I would say that some years ago, the scientists were not very aligned on whether there is truly climate change. But coming from one of the boards that I sit on, today all scientists, all governments are aligned. We recognize that there is climate change and something has to be done about it. And from the legal perspective, for someone like myself who's in practice, in the past for board is easy. Your duty is to maximize returns for your shareholders, full stop, regardless of everything. But even on the law side, things are changing. It's going to start to evolve, and in some countries, it's beginning to evolve to impose fiduciary duty on board to care for other stakeholders like employees and suppliers, vendors, and also the climate, the environment. We've seen a case against Shell in the courts of in the Dutch courts, where they've been actually lost the case, and that's still under appeal, where the board is required to reduce their carbon emission down to 45% of the target. So it is real now, and boards do have to recognize that they need more hands and more diverse skill set to come to the table to help look at the multifaceted challenges that they're facing. So that's, I think, for me, how I see the linkage. And you no longer can just focus on the business and maximize profits. There are so many other matters and angles and perspectives that board have to deal with. Yeah.
Thanks, Rachel. So in conclusion on the discussion of performance, is really fait accompli when it comes to diversity. So you need to have diversity because you're required to be sustainable, and you're required to be sustainable because your stakeholders are pushing for it. So your hands are tied, it's fait accompli. So maybe with that, we go over to Prue to answer a question from Raj. Then we got about 15 minutes left. I know Prof need to jump up at 5:25. After Prue, we'll go around the table to have closing remarks from the moderators, the panelists, as to what would be your Christmas wish for this year when it comes to diversity. One wish, that's all you get. So Prue, over to you before we wrap up.
Sure. Well, thanks for the question. And I've checked the statistics for Singapore companies, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, but I think it's just above 19%. That compares to Australia at over 34%. And it comes back to what I was saying beforehand. Institutional investors in Australia have a very big stick with their vote because companies are widely held, and you've got about 60% of ownership of companies by institutional investors. So if they get together, they can drum up almost majority vote to remove directors. And I think we saw that was mentioned beforehand on the Exxon board around a lack of expertise on climate change. There's also an organisation in Australia called the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors, which collectively own around 10% of the ASX 200. So they're the key pension funds. And so they've done campaigns against companies which haven't addressed board diversity, and they would identify the companies in the ASX 200, and there are none now that had no women on their board, and publish that on their website, put out press releases on these companies. So there's been a big push really over the last 10 or 12 years through institutional investors to drive change at company boards. And as I've also mentioned before, my engagement with company boards is that they see the changes as positive, that there's better discussion around the board table. And, it has brought more directors into the director pool. You'd see the same men on the same boards, all sitting there together. It has absolutely changed the nomination process. Most ASX 200 companies would go to a search firm. I know some boards say, well, that's expensive, but on the other hand, I think I would say that this is an investment. You get a good board of quality, competent people that can interact with management, that can provide management with the right counsel, advice, and challenge management in a constructive way. That's going to contribute to longer term returns. So it should be seen as an investment, not a cost. And my understanding with Singapore companies, the use of external firms, only really talking to the larger end of town, is not very common. And so it has absolutely driven change, and change for the better.
Right, thanks, Prue. There's a quick question from the floor from Mr. Wang Ting, Mr. Tan, I think. Rachel, the participant agrees with Rachel on skills and diversity, but he asks, what skills do gender bring to the table? What skills do gender bring to the table? Many takers?
Sorry,
Rachel?
I was just closing my screen. So I think Lian Sim also clearly mentioned, we are not just choosing a female candidate, just because for the sake that she wears a skirt. I mean, but if you look around, we do have female board members or candidates that are a little bit more focused on slightly different skills. For example, we do see more female board members coming from the professional services. We see some female board members, working in some of the multinationals in whether it's sales or maybe HR, for example. So just by percentage, they do come from or to come with certain slightly different skills. So I agree with our colleague here that we shouldn't just choose a female simply because she's female, but she has to be suitably qualified and experienced as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Rachel.
Thanks.
All right, 10 minutes more left to go to the session. Maybe we start with Prof. Loh. Turkey or the egg? What's your Christmas wish?
Neither turkey nor egg. Yeah, actually, my wish for diversity this Christmas, how do I say? Maybe not just diversity. I think that the more important thing is not diversity, but rationality. In other words, we don't look at the stocking, but we should look at the stuffing. Not just look at the optical manifestation, the demographic manifestation of composition, but really look at why do companies need diversity? Not as many of the panelists say, not just about diversity. In fact, I would say we should have not just diversity, which is the word just means only. We should have just diversity. The word just means equitable and rational. So rationality more than just diversity. That's my wish.
Thank you, Prof. You're going to get a very intelligent turkey for this Christmas. Lian Sim, what's your Christmas wish for diversity this year? It's just less than 3 months away.
Yes, it's that more companies would not only be diverse, but talk about why and how, so that we will all understand them better, and others who are less diverse will also get the message.
Thanks, Lian Sim. Prue, from yourself, are you in Australia now? From down under?
Oh, I'm actually sitting in Italy at the moment, but spending most of my time in Australia. I'd like to see SGX consider disclosure of the skills and experience matrix. That's no diversity disclosure in that at all. This is skills and experience. So I believe that boards have got to make this public about what skills and experience they are considering on their board, and particularly in that nomination process. That's going to lead to, I think, more diverse boards, and an outcome, because the outcome of that, if it's done properly, will be gender balance on those boards, without just focusing on let's just put a female on the board. Let's look at our range of the skills and matrix, the skills and experience we need for our company that are fit for purpose, fit for our company. An external nomination process to look for the right people. I think the outcome will be a diverse board in terms of gender, in terms of skills, and also experience. And it has been quite successful in Australia.
Thanks, Prue, from Italy, far off. Chin Yi, then we go to Rachel to take us home.
Sure. I do, my Christmas wish for diversity is a combination of what Prue and Lian Sim said. As I said, we'll be studying the disclosures of the companies very carefully over the next year. And I think in addition to just talking about their considerations of what diversity factors they have considered relevant, but to broaden the scope of their disclosure, to talk about the search process, the nomination process, their rationale for choosing each candidate in proper detail. I think that really helps the ecosystem and the mindset to change more quickly.
So it's not the wrapping, it's really the content. Thanks,
That's right.
Chin Yi.
That's right.
Great present for Christmas, Chin Yi. Thank you. And last but not least, Rachel, your wish for Christmas on diversity.
I want to make one comment, one appeal, and one Christmas wish, if I can.
Of course. Yes, please.
So I think on the comment, I want to say that, in every business, we are in the fight for talent, and at least half of the talent is female. And I do a lot of mentoring of female executives. And when they look up at the board, and if they see that there's no female board member, it's not inspirational for them at all, right? Because they feel that the board doesn't understand them as whether it's management as employees. So that's my comment. And my appeal is, to everyone who has, wives, sisters, daughters, right? Please, whether you're a board member, chairman, retail investor, do, think of this and push for the women to be there. And my Christmas wish is we still have in the top 100 SGX listed companies, 13 boards that are all male board. So my Christmas wish is that these 13 all male board, and we're only measuring the top 100, that this 13 all male board has a change of heart, and in the next year's AGM, do start to think about appointing female candidate. That is my Christmas wish.
I'm sure Rachel will be dressing up as Santa Claus and visiting these 13 companies one by one. So, so with that, let me summarize a very enlightening remarks from the panelists, and also great questions from the floor. Admittedly, seemingly a simple topic, diversity, but in terms of linking it to the chicken or the egg, the performance, we link it to sustainability, to climate change, is very challenging. But as what Chin Yi said, I think the award for the best panelist comes today goes to Chin Yi for having said it's a mindset change, it's a culture change. So it's not about the form, but it's not about but really more the substance, to bring forward to the next steps of diversity. So with that, thank you very much. I give you back 4 minutes of your time today. Panelists, thank you, Lian Sim, Prof. Loh, Prue, Rachel, and Chin Yi for your great time today. And thank you, participants, for attending this 1.5 hour session.